Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Frame and Sequence podcast. My name is Todd Rittendaro, and in this episode, I sit down with artist Nathan Fowkes. Nathan is a veteran entertainment industry concept artist with credits on 12 animated feature films, including DreamWorks Animation's The Prince of Egypt, several projects within the Shrek Universe, How to Train Your Dragon, and many others. Additionally, Nathan has been sought after as a consultant for game studios to enhance the quality of their theatrical presentations. He has worked with numerous clients, including Blizzard Entertainment, Disney Interactive, Riot Games, and many others. Nathan is also well known as a teacher of color, light, and design. He's a regular guest lecturer at Art Center College of Design and is taught at the Los Angeles Academy of Figurative Arts. He's the author of the best-selling book, How to Draw Portraits in Charcoal and How to Paint Landscapes in Watercolor and Gouache. Nathan teaches online at schoolism.com when his film production schedule allows. I first found Nathan's work on Instagram and immediately signed up for his Schoolism class on landscape sketching. The way that Nathan breaks down composition and color should be required study for anyone in the visual arts. Schoolism has offered a discount code to the listeners of this podcast, which gets you $5 off for the first 6 months using promo code Rittendaro, spelled Ritondaro. I have no affiliation with them, and this is not a sponsored podcast, but I am a huge fan of what they are doing. I've also linked to Nathan's books, website, and his Instagram page in the show notes, and I highly recommend checking them out. He shares some great bits of advice and wisdom in this episode, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, Nathan.
Hey, how are you, Todd?
Good. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I have admired your work for a very long time, and I'm very excited to ask you a bunch of questions. So.
Well, you are very generous. I'll do my best.
I think I first discovered your work. It must have been online through your sketchbooks and your just sort of daily posting of your landscape stuff. And I'm just curious, what started you down the art path?
That's a really good question. Everyone just kind of feels like an idiot once in a while. Just, you're an average person. You go through life and you do your thing. But I got some attention from drawing and I loved it. Every kid draws and then they kind of move into whatever the next thing is for them. And for me, that was the thing. I just never stopped and got a little better at it, got some attention from it. And that encouraged me to keep moving on. I grew up in the Central Valley of California, and even though it can get dry, dusty, and some people just do not like it, when that sun sets and you get the blue skylight and you get the red sunset light across those kind of cashmere yellow grassed hills,
oh yeah,
the patterns of light and shadow they're just unbelievable. And anyone thinks they're beautiful, but me on this art path, I just, I have to learn, like, why does it look electric? And I swore that I would learn how to paint it. I'd come back someday and I'd do it. And I go back many times with my sketchbook and try and see if I can get the paint somehow to approximate that magic. So, that was kind of the typical path.
Nice. What sort of work were you doing that you were getting a little bit of recognition for early on?
Well, the dumb thing I was doing was I was copying stuff, and then people would see it and say it looked great. Well, of course it looked great. I was copying, every kid copies comics or does whatever. But then I started sketching my friends. And even like their parents bought a few of the drawings. One of my friends was a star basketball player in high school. I did some drawings of him playing basketball. And his parents said, we'd like to buy one of those. Well, I thought that was great.
Yeah.
I think they even paid me like $50 for it or something, which is an astounding sum, in 1986, for a high school kid. So that was encouraging. And I just wanted to keep going and going from there.
So then after some of that recognition, I saw that you went to Art Center.
I did go to Art Center.
And had you looked at other schools, or what made you pick Art Center specifically?
I had taken some classes and just here and there. And it was clear to the teachers that I was extremely serious. And I'll go ahead and say, because I cracked the joke at the top that, you feel very average until you really focus on one thing and get a little recognition and start to improve at it. And so I became a fanatic about drawing, painting, practicing. And so that was clear to my teachers that I just was not going to stop. I was going for it. And so they said, well, Art Center is a place that you need to go to. And several different they kind of, it was very generous because they kind of pulled me aside, like, you're not kidding around about this stuff. You need to go to Art Center. And so that's what pointed me in that direction.
Oh, wow. Did you have any specific mentors before Art Center, or were you being self-taught at that point?
There's an artist, he's still around. He's a wildlife painter named Leon Parson. He went to Art Center. Extraordinary artist across the board, but what he eventually went into was landscape and wildlife painting.
Oh, wow.
And I was a big admirer and had an opportunity to take some classes from him. And he's one of the guys who said, now, I said, I was thinking about this school or that or doing this or that. He's like, no, you're going to art. So he almost said it as if, no, as if he's my dad, no, there's no possibility you're going to do those things. You're going to Art Center. And he wrote me a letter of introduction. He knew people at Art Center and had been a student there.
Yeah.
And that was my entrance to
Nice.
Art Center.
Oh, very cool. And was there a specific focus that you knew you wanted to do within Art Center?
No, I love drawing and painting. I thought at that time, because I work in animation now, it's kind of ironic that I had no plan to go into animation at that time. Because I kind of thought of animation, I thought of it as being the cartoony thing. And so I thought, well, I would do like book cover paintings and, dramatic stuff like that and be an illustrator. And so that's what I had in mind. In fact, I was such a fanatic about drawing that they had to set me straight at the beginning of Art Center. It was probably it may have been the most important thing that happened to me at art school, and I didn't recognize its importance at first. I'll tell you about it, because right at the beginning, I had this portfolio review with one of the instructors there, and we are going through my portfolio. It was mostly drawings, and I prided myself on my accuracy, and I thought I was being stylish in my drawings as well.
Yeah.
And so we're going through there, and he's asking me, and I was talking about how drawing really meant a lot to me, and I felt that traditional drawing was important, unlike those fakers over there in the fine art department, who think just because they did something, it's art, because I was in the illustration department. And it's always, especially at that time, it was kind of 90s were a transitional time at art schools. But especially at that time, there's always that fight between the kind of illustration and traditional drawing and painting.
Yeah.
And the fine art department, which ironically to some people usually eschews any kind of traditional drawing and painting. So I said this to this instructor, not realizing that he was one of those faker fine art instructors. And so he said, oh, really? Well, which drawings are you talking about, that aren't like, what's the fine art? And so, well, I think this one is like, no. You know what? I know exactly who you are looking through your portfolio. You are trying to be the big man on campus who can draw better than everybody else. And you are transparent. And people, it'll attract their attention they'll give you a pat on the back and say, wow, so you drew that? Wow, it's amazing. And they'll forget about you 10 minutes later. So there's no emotion in your drawings. You aren't making an emotional connection. And that was the first hit that there was something out there that I really didn't get about being an artist. And even though that helped, I didn't truly get it all the way until several years later when I was working at DreamWorks Animation. And basically, I didn't get fired or anything. I had 15 fantastic years at DreamWorks and very proud of what we did there. But basically, kind of metaphorically speaking and condensing several years into one event, they basically took me out to, and for people listening in who aren't in this area, we're in Los Angeles right now, of course, and people think, oh, the beach, the palm trees, and that's true, it's beautiful. But on the other side of LA is the Mojave Desert, where all the bodies are buried.
Oh, yeah.
And basically, they took me out to the desert and they beat me until I got it. Because you are not an artist until your work in some way has an emotional connection with your intended audience. It took me way too long to get that. And so even I'm still a fanatic about doing good drawing, accurate drawing, even stylish drawing or painting if that's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't have some kind of emotional connection with your audience, I'm sorry, but you're going nowhere because no one cares until they feel it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. Absolutely. Did you have a breakthrough piece where you felt like you had created some sort of emotional resonance?
I did, but I also took a lesson from that breakthrough piece that I try and bring to the students that I have now, because I'm still full-time in animation and full-time artist and illustrator, but I also do some teaching when production schedule allows. And so one of the things I learned about those breakthrough pieces, I did a piece that's still hanging up, the Los Angeles Academy of Figurative Art, where I did teach for many years. And it's a big, giant 3-foot by 4-foot portrait painting. And I use these big 3-inch brushes, 5-inch brushes, and just, it all finally clicked. The accuracy of the portrait combined with the warm temperatures, the cool temperatures, the lost and the found, the expression, because I thought beautiful color and accuracy was enough in doing a portrait, until I was informed that your portraits all have frowns and everyone hates them because they don't care about your beautiful brushwork. They see the expression. And those every 19th century or 18th century photograph, or early photography, they all have frowns because they had to sit there for 30 seconds or even 10 minutes while it exposed.
Right.
And so you always wonder, why are they so, those were hard times. They probably were, but no, they had to sit for 5 minutes for that exposure. Well, portrait drawing is the same. Your sitter sits and their face turns into a frown. I finally learned that you can do all the beautiful brushwork in the world, and if people see a frown, that's what they feel. Anyway, so I finally figured that out and got the painting down, the warms and cools, where to put the lost edges, the hard edges, the soft edge. And I did this big giant piece, and just all these different things that are so hard and so complicated, they clicked. But at the same time, I kept that piece in my portfolio for a long time, until someone in a friendly way suggested, that was your breakthrough art school piece, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. It's time to take it out. And everyone has that piece that they have an emotional attachment to. And 5 years later, they don't realize that it doesn't hold up anymore compared to their new work, because they got so much attention from it 5 years ago.
Right. When you were finishing up at Art Center, and at that point, did you know you wanted to do animation?
No, still not. But I'll tell you what I did know, because this was a big deal to me. So the early 90s, the invention of computer CG. And I'm not a CG guy. I'm a traditional painter, so to speak. All my professional work is done digitally. But and I do a little bit of 3D work and 3D modeling, not much because I hate it. And so I do the absolute minimum because I'm a painter, at heart, and that's the concept art, they're paintings. But 1993, and I'm in art school, and Jurassic Park comes out. And even though that was 1993 and CG has come what was that, 25 years ago?
Yeah.
And so we have come so far, and CG is in almost every movie now, and it's great. It's fantastic. I went and saw Jurassic Park. We had never seen anything like that before. And I just watched Jurassic Park, the original one, with my kids 2 weeks ago. They're still little, they're still young. They just hit the age where I feel like, okay, it's not going to give them nightmares. We watched it. And that scene where the T-Rex comes out into the rain, it holds up. I cannot believe 1993 and that one scene is as good as anything being done now. And in the rain, I have some personal experience with CG done in weather. It's hard to do, expensive to do. That scene still holds up. I came home from that movie. I looked at the artwork that I had on my desk that I was doing, and that artwork was very small and very weak by comparison. And I think I laid in bed all day and couldn't get out of bed, just like I'm a nobody. And that was a game changer for me. I pulled myself out of bed, dusted myself off, and told myself, you can't do what you've been doing. It's go big or go home. You have to, you're doing this now. And you're going to knock down any barrier that keeps you from doing this, whatever, move. And so we saw this coming, and this was a difficult time in art school because they were still grounded in what an illustrator did in the 80s, which is editorial illustration. And I had to go to some of my teachers and tell them, I'm not going to do this. I'm just not. This is it now. And that was the smartest thing I ever did, because concept art, animation, movies, that was the big thing on the horizon.
Yeah.
And we saw it coming right there, 1993, and I was part lucky in timing. And so I had an opportunity then to have my portfolio seen at DreamWorks. It was a year after I was out of art school. I was working actually in theme park show design, I was an illustrator. I had a job.
Yeah, incredible.
I was actually doing concept art for theme parks, but I had an opportunity to show my portfolio at DreamWorks, and luckily that went well, and it's history.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, that whole time period for me especially is so inspiring. But yeah, definitely a product of the Lucas Spielberg canon and all of the books of concept art that were coming out around that time. I was just devouring those things and so inspired. That's what really launched me into wanting to do film.
Yeah, and no one was teaching that at art schools yet.
DreamWorks was sort of just getting off the ground with animation at that point.
95.
Yeah. Wow. So were you part of that freshman class?
Right at the beginning.
Really?
That was something that I don't want to say it'll never happen again, because there's always new collaborations and the new big thing and amazing opportunities. It's a better time right now than any time in history. Even better than the 90s, because so much is happening right now. But just by that chance of timing, and combined with me just being a nutcase about feverishly drawing and painting day and night, because that's just my personality. Steven Spielberg had Amblimation in London, had been doing Fievel Goes West was a sequel, and an American Tale.
American Tale.
Yeah. It was doing those shows. And so that's what was happening in animation at that time. Disney was kind of a little bit dead, but they had their resurgence starting with The Little Mermaid. Anyway, so Spielberg had the best artists from all over Europe at Amblimation doing animation and design and lots of projects in development. He shut all that down at the start of DreamWorks, but he invited all of those artists, he would pave the way to get their green cards, visas, whatever it took, to come over to DreamWorks. He needed that talent and that experience. So I was brand new to animation. These people were more experienced than I was. We had people that had been kind of poached from Disney with experience coming over. And so it was this melting pot of people from all over animation, all over Europe. It was, you can't believe it. Oh, and here's the other thing. There was a bit of a price war, I think, with Disney. And I wasn't in on this because I was new and not experienced in animation. But, you have to pay for experienced talent. And so it got to a point where DreamWorks said, we can't raise, astronomically the amount that we pay anybody. So what we're going to do is we're going to have great food, and it's going to be free. We're going to serve breakfast and lunch every day, and we're going to serve fresh baked desserts every day at 3:00. Do you know how much weight I gained during my first? And then I lost. I had to do my fanatic thing. You're blowing it, buddy. And so I lost. I gained like 15 pounds, and then I had to knock that off. But I'll tell you, if you don't mind, there's one other thing that I have to tell about that time period. It was such a melting pot. We had this, and to this day I don't know what the story behind this was, but we had this old guy, amazing guy, who had an office on the DreamWorks campus. He was 83 years old, I think. And he had been a production designer in Hollywood for many years, production designed a lot of Hollywood movies. So for whatever reason, he had an honorary office at the studio. He wasn't involved in any of the projects. As far as I knew, he wasn't developing projects. But I think he was a friend of Steven Spielberg, and it was his way of kind of staying engaged, in his old age. So he was around on campus. And so one day he bumps into one of the French artists, and he says to the French artist, says, "Oh, I can tell by your accent you're from France." Keep in mind the older guy is something like early 80s. He said, "I can tell you're from France. Where in France are you from?" And he said, "Oh, I'm from Brittany." And he said, "Oh, Brittany, I bombed your town during the war."
Oh my God, Jesus.
Oh, wow. What do you say to that?
Great opener.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, he wasn't bombing civilian, Brittany-friendly town, but I think if I remember right, it was something about there was a U-boat installation at the port. And I think that was the target, so I don't think he was taking out relatives or anything, but wow, that's the kind of melting pot that it was at that time.
What an incredible, the new campus of DreamWorks, which is gorgeous, and, all that energy flowing, just must have been incredible.
It was remarkable.
And so when you started there, what department were you in? Were you an animator, or were you background or visual?
I started backgrounds, yeah. So we, and a lot of people know this, but some don't. Back in those days in traditional animation, the departments were very compartmentalized to get a smooth running, streamlined production pipeline. And so there was layout department that would draw up the scenes. And then the background department, we would do color keys, which are just small sketch paintings that establish the color and the lighting design. So we'd get that approved to make sure we had the right mood, the right kind of feel. We'd paint those keys. And then we would have the line work for the layouts. And then in acrylics, we would do finished paintings that appear in the show.
Yeah.
And obviously that was replaced when we went to Shrek and the CG stuff. So at that point, I became a visual development artist, which was more of a front end kind of design thing, which was fantastic. And a lot of artists might think, oh yeah, you got to be on the front end, and have more of a contribution, which is great. But I always miss just you sit down and you do your painting. You sit down and you do. It has to be a good looking painting. It has to be, and I miss that.
Actually, I think two of those early films, Will Weston, who I've interviewed before, who's now running the entertainment arts track at Art Center, he often references Prince of Egypt and Road to El Dorado as to really look at the background and visual development of those films.
Interesting times.
Yeah, I bet. Very cool. And then so you were at DreamWorks for 15 years, did you say?
15 years.
Wow, incredible. And did you have any mentorship over there, or is there a training program, or they just throw you in the deep end?
They do throw you in the deep end, but we had, and it doesn't exist now for the most part. For instance, at the beginning of The Prince of Egypt, all of us in the background department, the paintings have to look like they come off the hand of the same artist. And so we all had to be on the same page. And so our leader was Paul Hussein as far as style. And Paul Hussein, for anyone who's not familiar with his work, he's one of the best artists I've ever met, and great guy. And that was a mentorship for all of them. And I've worked with Paul off and on over the years. I still, it's funny. I think Paul's 5 years older than me. And so at that time, it seemed like a lifetime of experience that he had that I didn't have yet. He's like 5 or 6 years older than me is all. But oh my gosh, what he could do back then. So I think I was like 25, 26, wow. And he was 30, 31. Anyway, now our ages are negligible. 5 years now is just not that much of a difference.
Right.
But I still look at his work and think of him as this guy who's still and I'm just sure, I don't really know this for sure because Paul is a hard worker, but I'm still that fanatic, I got to sketch, I got to paint, and so I'm just convinced that I put in more hours than him and he is still out there ahead. And so he's in my mind then and now, just always like kind of the mentor guy, the guy to look to.
Wow, cool. I'm not too familiar with his work. I'll definitely have to...
Yeah, it's around. You can find stuff online.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool. I'll definitely give it a look. So after DreamWorks, did you go freelance or move to a different studio?
I went freelance, yeah. I got a call from my wife from the hospital. Now, it was fine. It was a checkup on her pregnancy. And hey, babe, how did the checkup go? Oh, it went really good. Oh, all right, glad to hear it. Yeah, it went doubly good. Oh, okay. Glad it went so well. That's not, something's a little odd about, yeah, doubly good. Did you hear what I just said? Doubly good? And then I got it. Twins.
Amazing.
So, DreamWorks is a reasonable place to work as far as hours, but there, from time to time, there's some pretty brutal overtime to have the trailers ready and then you have a hard day. Those release dates, it's like a chess match. Like you have to hit that checkmate on the day you release your movie. If you have to move the movie to a different date, you might make $50 million less,
right,
on the wrong date. And so you have to do whatever it takes. So those things happen. And then there's the LA commute. So even if you get out of work, it was pretty typical. People finish up at 6 o'clock. Well, you have twin babies at home and they go to bed by 7. They eat at 6, they go to bed by 7. And my wife was having a hard time. My little babies, I wasn't seeing them.
Right.
And I got a call from Blue Sky Studios. And they said, hey, we don't know if you're free, but so a couple people over there were familiar with my paintings. And they said we could use some freelance help on some shows coming up. Do you have any availability? And I said, well, I'm here in LA. I'm not available to move out to the East Coast where they're located. They said, no problem. If you were able to work out of your home studio, we're fine with freelance. And I took that as to make the break after 15 years at DreamWorks. And that was great. We worked on Rio 2. We worked on Ferdinand the Bull, and had a great time on that. But that was the thing that spurred me to make the break from DreamWorks. I thought I might go back in-house, working from home. Oh my gosh! I mean, it's at times it's very difficult and has its ups and downs. But to be able to take a nap in the middle of the day if you feel like you really need it. That's worth anything you lose, that one thing right there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. Do you ever miss the energy of being on campus or,
I thought I would.
Yeah.
I really thought I would. But a couple things that have evolved over the years. I mentioned I do some teaching. I started teaching, being the life drawing fanatic, I started teaching life drawing in 1999 and taught that in a classroom for a good decade. And then I've switched as the kids have gotten older and demands increase. I've taken all of my teaching online. But that's like interaction with other artists and other people that kind of helps fill that.
Right.
I get to talk to people about art, and I get to tell them everything that's wrong with their work, which is loads of fun. I get to tell them they only have an outside chance of amounting to something someday, and they take that as a challenge, throwing down the gauntlet. I don't really put it like that, but and so they're like, oh yeah, you think I have an outside chance? Well, guess what, Nathan? I'm going to work so hard that I'm going to put you and your twins out of work into the gutter unapologetically. Well, that's the goal, to spur their enthusiasm and their work ethic.
Yeah.
So teaching, and out of teaching, I get some invites, to do workshops and visit other places and do some traveling for workshops. And that's been enough to fill that void that I got from the studio.
I've been fortunate enough to do one of your online classes through Schoolism, which was spectacular. There is so much information in that has taken my work to the next level. So
good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, they're great. So I'd love to just get into more sort of how you approach art in general and story and stuff like that. When you are approaching a painting, is your approach different than when you're approaching a larger project, or do you always start at the same point?
Here's the starting point for me. You make sure you have a really good writer, because I'm not a writer. That's actually what I love about this business, the collaboration of it. You're working with great people, and it's kind of like, if anyone out there has ever played sports with someone who's just a little bit better than they are, but definitely better, you up your game. They can still beat you, but you play better. And that's kind of how it is on these projects. So I'm not a writer, but someone has a really great story, and then my job is to be able to visualize the story. And I wish I could sit down and do really great paintings and just let them just flow off the brush or the pen tool, as it were. But I start with little tiny thumbnails. And the nice thing about that is I'll sit down and just do 10 super quick thumbnails in my sketchbook. And they might not even make sense to anyone other than me. But out of those 10 or 20 or more, one of them is going to have a kernel of an idea, like, oh, there's something there, I could do that with it. And I'll take that and scan it in to Photoshop and just throw, some light at it, some warm and cool at it, and push and pull and see where it's going and develop it in Photoshop. That way, it's just kind of baby steps. I can do a sketch in my sketchbook, then I can bring a little light to it, then I can bring some warm and cool or some color, a color mood to it, and then I can bring a little detail in the important areas, and then I can add a couple characters, having done all that life drawing that work with the story,
right.
And then all of a sudden, all these things that looked in the finished painting, look at it, oh, it's too hard, I don't know how to do that. But these little steps along the way, I can do that. And that's always my approach.
How do you like to approach story emotionally?
Color scripting, boy, that's what I love. If I get offered a job to color script a project, I'll drop a better paying project. That's the thing I love the most. And what we often do for that process, a lot of work already gets done. We will do a very rough early color script, but then the director, the storyboard artists, and the previs guys, they will they'll do CG rough, they'll do animatics. And so they'll rough out the scenes in just very blocked in geometry. And then what we'll do at that point is we'll take all that footage, they'll block out the whole movie and just see how it all feels together.
Oh, wow.
And then it's very rough, very quick, very blocked in. But then that can serve as a very simple layout. And so we'll literally just grab frame captures out of that footage. And then I know roughly what the scene is and where characters will be placed. And so I'll paint over top of that in Photoshop and do quick comps that have the right, we hope, the right color mood and the right lighting mood. And the shape lane, a color script isn't just a color script. It's a time of day script. It's a lighting script. It's a color script. It's a mood script. It's a shape script. It's a line script. It's meant to do all of the visual language elements and take you through the roller coaster ride. The way I like to put it is in the same way that the musical score guides us through the emotional ups and downs of a story, a good color script is meant to do exactly the same thing. And so that's what I love, is the color script.
Oh, that's really cool. It's interesting. One of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast is because I've been lucky enough to know a lot of people in animation, a lot of people in live action, a lot of photographers. And I often feel like that there's things that live action people can learn from animators, and photographers can teach live action. And there is crossover, obviously, but that is something that I wish I learned in film school, is like, they teach you about knowing where the characters are emotionally and how a shot or a composition might do that. And of course, color plays into it, but actually taking it to that further step and making a color script, I think, is something I'm going to definitely adopt.
Yeah, and I've been, I love movies and I'm an admirer cinematography. I'm just flabbergasted at what's pulled off in movies in terms of cinematography and filming. And I'm not a photographer, but there have been a few, there have been a few of the remakes, and I'm actually thinking of, not the ones the last couple of years, but several years ago, I'm thinking of a couple of where they took classic Disney movies or movies that were animated and made a live action out of it. And some of them were pretty good and had some good looking stuff. And a few of my friends even did production design on those shows. Yeah. But one thing that really, frankly, kind of upset me was there was, I think of it without knowing the photography terminology, it was kind of standard photography looked where, the lights are a little burned out so you can see in the shadows. And then the shadows are a little black, a little dark, so you can really see what's going on in the midtones, and that sort of a photography kind of a look. And sometimes we do that in animation, but sometimes we'll go in and say, no, there's no white, no burnout in this scene. It's going to be a color. It's either going to be a product of the local color, or it's going to be a product of the light. And then you get this palette that's a palette of color that's extraordinary. That's not always appropriate. You don't do that all the time. But for some moments and some scenes, you do. And that kind of a care had been completely missing in some of the live action kind of fantasy movies. And I just felt like it was a loss and a missed opportunity.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What I'm so drawn to, speaking of the color work, is your color work, and you are also one of the most prolific keepers of sketchbooks that I've maybe ever seen. Just looking at the giant wall of sketchbooks behind you as we sit in your studio. How did that all come about? Is that just a practice you've kept since you were young?
Yeah, I keep mentioning it, and maybe it's because we're doing this interview, and you start to feel a little self-conscious. It's all about you, and so I mentioned about my frantic, maniacal, trying to get better, and felt that way for many years. The sketchbook has been the most useful thing because. Right here, we're here in my studio right now, and behind us is my desk, and there's sketchbooks scattered all over the desk right there. And then behind is, right behind is another stack of sketchbooks. In my car are a couple of sketchbooks. When I was at other studios or at DreamWorks, I had sketchbooks on my desk there. Basically, anywhere I spend any time, there's a couple of sketchbooks laying around. And so there's no excuse. You're always doing something. And so what that means is, after a decade of heavy lifting, and this is what I tell my students, they always worry about, well, do I have the talent? And I tell them, too late. You were already born, and the brain, the genetic code, whatever it is, it's already there,
right.
Too late. If you were born with talent or not, it already happened. So forget about that and just practice. And some people, can pull it off in a matter of years, and some people takes longer. But after a decade of heavy lifting, those ideas are there. And so if you come across some really difficult challenges, chances are you've taken on something similar in the last 20 years. You've had a similar problem that you've solved. And then it's almost as if that's muscle memory. And all of a sudden something clicks into place that you did 10 years ago, and you solved a little problem, and this thing and that thing couldn't come together, and you figured out, if I transition the color and then I do this and then I kind of have this rhythm move right through it, all of a sudden these two different things work together. Something like that. You find that solution, and then weeks later, months later, years later, the same thing might come up and it clicks into place. Well, if you've done 20,000 sketches, then you have a lot of things that you can draw on that just might click into place for you.
Yeah.
And so any random person, if they're determined, can really do something special. And it's kind of what I've come to, because I'm not getting any younger, these years. And the human thing is doing something that has value for other people. That's what you do, whatever it is. You do something that has value for other people. When you do that, and when you actually have that thing that you do be extra special, when you have something of meaning to bring to the table, that's when doors open for you, opportunities open up for you. Do things of value for other people, and you'll have a valuable life. And so, as I get a little older, I start thinking in those terms.
Yeah. Do you think you'll head in a different direction with your art?
That is a good question. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Because Todd, you and I were talking a little bit earlier before we turned on the microphone. I had a bit of a medical scare earlier in the year.
Right.
I want to tell everyone, don't worry. I'm absolutely 100% fine, in every way. And in fact, I'm better than 100% fine. But I went through an experience this last year where the initial diagnosis was, you're dead, and you're going to be dead soon. And it all comes into focus in that moment. And you kind of reevaluate, what your time really means at that point.
Right.
So it turned out we took care of the situation, and they did an in-depth biopsy at what they thought would be a problem. And it turned out the initial diagnosis was wrong. And it was a benign situation. We took care of it.
What a relief.
back to 100%. But I spent 3 weeks. I spent 3 weeks believing that I had a few years to live. They were pretty certain about it, and we were waiting for that second and more in-depth biopsy to come back. But oh my gosh, nobody knows when you're going to end up marching in that black parade.
Right.
And everything, this is another thing I think I thought about a lot since the beginning. I remember I used to play, it's this song from, it's Supertramp, 70s band, but they're great, they're fantastic.
For sure.
Supertramp. But they had this line, and I would listen to this song over and over to motivate myself in art school, because I was so, I wanted this so bad, my teeth ached, And so this song has this line, Supertramp, about the person they're singing about looks back through the years at what they might have been and what they could have been. And I just thought that would be the worst. I could think of nothing worse than getting to an age and looking back and like, what did you do? What did it mean? What did it matter? What was it that you let get in the way? And, everything that we fear, everything that holds us back, everything that we like, oh man, it's too much. It's all of those things, they don't matter. You hit that end and all of that comes to nothing.
Right.
It means nothing. And you look back at what you did. And so I had that experience this year. What I have to tell everybody though is you guys are stuck with me. I've got 30 plus years left. I'm over here pushing 50 years old.
Happy to hear it, of course.
Yeah, but everyone stuck with me, yelling at them, my students, yelling at them that they're, when I was at Art Center, we wouldn't put up with homework assignments like you just turned in, Everyone's got to listen to me do that for the next 30 years, so
Great.
I'm good.
That's good. And do you see yourself moving more into teaching, or?
No, not necessarily. I think if I was a full-time teacher, I'd start to hate it.
Yeah.
It's a nice aside. One of the tricks I always use is the grass is always greener. And so you're doing something, you're like, oh, I really wish I was doing something else. We're all like that. And so I do. I'll switch and do my online teaching. And then I'll go back and do my digital, try and reach that deadline. Then I get sick of digital painting. You want to be doing something else, so you do it. And it's a different kind of art, and then you get sick of that, and so you switch to a different kind of art and do that. And so that's how I stay productive.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I like bouncing back and forth. It keeps everything fresh for me. So I'm just curious. I know we mentioned your schools and classes online, and if anyone is at all interested in learning how to draw like you, I cannot recommend that course enough. And so without getting into specifics, though, I'd kind of like to maybe just pick your brain a little bit about how you think or how you approach light and sketches. When you're looking at a scene, are you trying to capture the exact quality of the light, or more what it feels like rather than the exact color? Or how are you finding those subtleties in your work that make everything kind of come together?
One of the hardest things to learn in landscape painting is that it's not possible to paint what you see. It's physically not possible. Your pigment, just you hold up black paint against, and hold it up against a dark shadow, and that black's reflecting a lot of light back. The black can't match the blackest shadow that you see.
Yeah.
And same thing with pure white. And so we're trying to paint something with a pigment that is not capable of doing it. And beginners aren't aware of that. They don't understand that limitation. And so they'll see a white rock, but it's in shadow. So it looks really bright, so they'll paint it bright. And then they're looking over in the light, and maybe there'll be a dark thing in the light, and they'll paint that really dark. And then all of a sudden their light and shadow makes absolutely no sense, because there's light things in the dark and dark things in the light, and it's over. It all falls apart.
Right.
And they say they're baffled, and they're pulling their hair out saying, but I painted it exactly the way I saw it. Why did it go so terribly wrong? Well, they were actually trying to paint what they saw, or what they felt like they saw in the moment. And I know that's kind of counterintuitive, that you don't paint what you see, and a lot of people have heard, paint what you see, not what you know. Well, there's some truth to that. We kind of know what a thing looks like and paint a symbol of it instead of how it really looks. But what I'm always pushing my students to do is to squint at their landscape painting. Squint their eyes way down so they're just looking through their eyelashes. And all you see are big masses of light and shadow. And then don't lose that simple statement as you work. Don't let that simple statement get away from you. It's critically important. The one other thing about landscape painting that I think is critical if you're painting on location, there's literally a billion details. You couldn't possibly paint all of them. You wouldn't try. So the question is, which ones are you going to paint and why? And so I'm always pushing my students to ask themselves, okay, you saw this spot, you stopped and painted there. There was a reason why you picked that spot. What was it? Pin down exactly what it was about that location, and then pull that out. Let everything else go. You've got maybe an hour before the light changes, if it's a sunny day. And that will give you something that sometimes will be better than a photograph, because it has that sense of purpose.
Right. That's a great distinction. I mean, I do feel like the way that you paint light in some ways is almost more special than a photograph, and I love photography, but there's a subtlety with paint that I feel like, even with, the super high-res digital is just not going to capture.
Yeah. Well, I do have a trick. My trick, I call it poor man's impressionism, because that's what it is. But, we all know about Seurat, who did, and it was a breakthrough what they were doing back then in the 1800s. He did Seurat, the artist the pointillist, ... and then you stand back and it all makes sense. And he put colors together optically. That was a breakthrough. That was kind of the big breakthrough of the Impressionists. You put two colors together that have a contrasting hue, but they're similar in value, and they kind of vibrate. That's a known art visual thing. They call it simultaneous contrast, where you might have blue-gray And you might have a yellow gray, and the yellow gray just looks drab and brown, and the blue gray just dead and cold. They're just completely dead. You put them side by side, and by the contrast of each other, these two dead grays all of a sudden vibrate and have some life. And if you paint like that, that lushness that happens with real light, just that visual that the paint can't capture. The way that paint can capture that is that optical mixing. Well, I don't have the patience that Thoreau had, and that poor guy, I think he worked himself to death. He died when he was like 29 or something. Tragically. But what I like to do is get out there, and you have your hour deadline, before this California sunshine. You have about an hour, and then you're seeing a different light and shadow composition. So I like to kind of just dry brush. Like you might look at a sky and say, yeah, it's a blue sky, but the sunlight is streaming through it, backlighting it. And if I had to put a color, if I had to call it a color, sure, I would say blue, but somehow it's warm. Somehow it's glowing, more than blue. Well, I'll put a yellow wash down. I'll kind of scumble it on so it dries immediately. And then I'll dry brush a blue over top of it that's about the same value, meaning the same darkness as the yellow. And so a little bit, still blue, but a little of that yellow peeks through the dry brush stroke. And so you have that little dot of the texture. It's like pointillism. And all of a sudden, your blue sky has a little bit of a vibration, a luminosity, a warm glow. And all of a sudden, it's a little more like light. And so I treat my paintings like that when and where I can and where I think it's appropriate. And all of a sudden, paint, which can't do anything near what light can, all of a sudden it starts feeling like it does.
Right. And you're using a combination of watercolor and gouache mainly for your sketches?
Yeah, I like, every medium has its ups and downs. And I tried everything and had a lot of disasters early on, my early efforts with oils and acrylics and all of that. So what I came to was watercolors. And I never thought of myself as a watercolorist, but the pigments, they dry out just as fast out in the hot sun as gouache or acrylics would right on your palette. And I tried every scheme to keep them wet, but I just, too much, I was fighting the paint. You don't have time to fight the paint. Well, watercolor, it dries out as fast as anything else, but you spritz it with a little spray bottle, a good brand of watercolor like Winsor Newton, which I use, it comes right back to life. And so it's so convenient for on-location sketching. All of a sudden I found myself a watercolorist. But as you paint with acrylics or oils and you use white, you use white, not because it's white, but you use white to mix the color that you need. I still use white gouache with my watercolors and paint the same as if I were using all gouache or all oil or all acrylic. That just became my go-to medium.
Right. Do you still keep a sketchbook daily?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, that's very inspiring.
Sometimes it's 3 lines, like almost literally, like, okay, I'm dead tired, like I literally cannot keep my eyes open. But if I let this daily habit slip away, if I let a few days go by, it'll turn into another day, it'll turn a week, a month. So doing 3 lines is not going to help you in the 25-year scheme of things. Those 3 lines will not help you, but it keeps the habit in place.
Right.
And so I sit down and do, how could I put a rectangle and then put a circle and 2 lines in an interesting way? And I do that, 30 seconds. And then I've done my daily sketch and I go to bed.
Yeah.
But it's because it's the habit. If you let that habit slip away, the dream could slip away.
Right. This might be a tricky question, but if you had to say what was more important to making a good sketch or a good, let's just call it a good piece, would you put the emphasis on composition or that color contrast type of thing? Or
yes,
is it just everything?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I hate the answer to this question. Because I was going on and on about, patting myself. Everyone listening to the podcast like, yeah, Nathan, don't break your arm patting yourself on the back about, yeah, I'm great at drawing. I practice every day and I'm the big man on campus for drawing. And color, oh yeah, color, my color vibrates and it's so luminous and everyone's going to love it and everything. So I hate the answer to your question because it's not color and it's not draftsmanship. You can do an image that has really amateurish color. And you can do an image that has a very amateurish drawing. And if it has a knockout composition, just something that just grabs your attention, from 20 yards away, and you just have to, it draws you in, it just has this knockout punch.
Right.
It's just, I'm getting, even though I'm upset about it, I'm getting all excited about it, because it's just this composition all of a sudden becomes the rolling boom of thunder that makes your artwork come to life, when I so much want it to be the draftsmanship and I want it to be the color and the light. But composition will do that for you. And if your draftsmanship isn't so good and your color isn't so good, you know what people will say that just drives me insane?
What's that?
They'll assume that you did it on purpose. They'll say, yeah, it's very, it has like a charming naivete, or they'll say it has like, you're really rough and scratchy and your technique is terrible. They'll say, oh yeah, such an aggressive technique.
Right.
If your composition is engaging, people will forgive just about anything else.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. That just reminds me that Carl Ganass has a great just one-liner that is composition is storytelling.
Yes.
And I just think that that's so powerful. Yeah. When you are sitting down with your sketchbook and you're looking at a scene, do you have a specific thing in mind that you're trying to achieve or explore?
Yeah, there's two different kinds of illustration, and they go in very different directions. And there's even a problem with the crossover, because there are some really amazing artists out there, and I really admire, and they'll do book cover work and do kind of personality illustrations, the kind of work, their thing. And so they'll do some interesting shapes, and they'll kind of brush in some interesting textures, and then that will inspire them, like, oh, that could become a cliffside, and then those shapes right there, I could actually turn that into a spaceport, and then I could lead you into the scene and have some spaceships coming in, or whatever it might be. And they just let it evolve, and so these completely unexpected and amazing compositions can come out of that, something that you wouldn't think of cold and off the cuff. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, when you're working in production illustration and in animation, I'm sorry, but you're supposed to put a fence right there, and you're supposed to put a hut right there, and you have to put another thing right there. And the issue is, those things don't necessarily go together. In fact, chances are they're not going to look good together at all. And so I'm glad you brought composition into the question, because that's exactly the answer. To me, the definition of composition, or what it's all about, is here we have an image filled with all kinds of different things. Sometimes they're very unrelated. And as an artist, you've got to find a way. You have to have a whole arsenal of varying ideas on how to make all of those different things feel like they belong together. Mm. And not just belong together, they have to all feel like they're like one in purpose, back to that knockout punch.
Right.
And that is so hard to do. And I remember a particular occasion we were working on one of the Shrek projects, and I'd been working so hard as this scene. It had a lot of characters in it, and it was like this concept piece that set up all the characters, and Shrek, I think he was telling a story with characters gathered around him, and I spent a lot of time on it. And the director came in and he said, oh, I like it, good job, but we just had a story meeting this morning, and now instead of sitting down, he's standing in the doorway. So I know you've been working really hard on this, and I know that you keep your characters on separate layers in Photoshop. Just grab your Shrek and scoot him over into the doorway, and you're done. It's great, And then the meeting's over, and then the production manager comes over, with their clipboard, says, okay, so you're going to wrap this up, and then we're going to move you on to sequence, 200 and whatever. And I said, no, it's not. And that's not what's going to happen, because that composition worked, and scooting him over, even though he said to do that, if I do that and he comes back and looks at it, he's going to say, what the heck are you doing? This looks horrible. I know that will happen.
Totally.
And what you're asking for is a recomposition. And that's just the nature of the beast. When I decided what classes I was going to teach on schoolism, I went for what I consider to be the big three. There's actually four, but I'm not good at one of them. So once you have your foundation, your draftsmanship, your perspective, to be a concept artist, you've got to be good at color and light. So that was my first schoolism class. You've got to be able to create special, magical, meaningful places. So my second class was environment design. But then the third one was composition, because that clenches it. all of those environmental elements, all of those characters, the way the light and shadow works with all of the environmental elements and all the characters, what a mess. It's a disaster every single time, unless you have compositional ideas that are going to bring all of those things together. Right. The fourth thing is character design. And even though I did all the life drawing, and I'm proud of that, I'm not so much of a character designer, but at Schoolism we have some of the best character designers in the business doing their class. So
right.
I'm very happy to say, don't take my class, go over and take the character design class. It's going to be important.
But you also have a new class coming up, right, with the portraits in charcoal?
Yes. Yeah. So teaching has been such a great thing for me, and so those are my 3 concept art classes that I mentioned. Then, because watercolor is, I'm a nut on that subject, so we did the watercolor sketching class at Schoolism.
Yeah.
And now the other thing, I keep mentioning life drawing, and I got beat up at Art Center about the way I was approaching life drawing.
Right.
Now I know what I'm doing. Now, after all these years, I know how the game is played. So I'm going to be doing a life drawing class. And how do you do a life drawing class? Well, it's portrait drawing in charcoal. And the students, they're going to, if they're independently wealthy and they want to hire a model, that's fantastic. But they're going to get their friends and family to pose for them. And if their friends and family says, heck no, I'm not going to sit for you. Are you joking? Then they can look in the mirror and they can do self-portraits. They can light themselves all different kinds of ways. We can experiment. You just set up 2 mirrors and you can get your head from any angle just by 2 mirrors reflecting into each other.
Right.
So it's the easiest thing in the world if you want to really learn how to draw. And if you can construct the head 3-dimensionally in drawing with light and shadow, and you can make hair feel like something different than flesh, and you can make light feel like light, shadow feel like shadow. If you can do that, you can do anything. And so that's going to be my new class for 2020.
Wow, very cool. And you have a book already, though, right?
Yes, yes. Because the landscape sketching class. Thank you, by the way, for mentioning the book. Mm-hmm. Do we have time for me to tell a little story about the book?
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's actually we got pretty heavy there for a minute because we're having fun here and that's how it's meant to be.
For
but
sure.
At the same time, life hits you with a couple of bullets. Each one of us or someone close to us. I don't mean literally hit by a bullet. I hope
right.
I'm going to assume that's not going to happen to nearly all of the people. But you will get hit. You will get hit, and it'll knock you all the way down. And you got to be in some way wearing that bulletproof vest and be able to deal with it. So we got heavy with what was for a moment life and death kind of a situation. So my landscape sketching book, I'd done the class, and I was really excited to take that material, expand on it, and I'd been doing a bunch of new paintings and bring it all together in instructional sketching and painting landscapes in watercolor. And then this medical thing hit. And what had happened was they found a mass on my spine, mass growing on my spine. Yikes! You do not want that.
No.
And so I started getting numbness in my hands. I started getting numbness in my feet. I started having these problems. And I'm a person, I live and die by my hands. This was horrifying. When at first it was misdiagnosed, and then they figured out what it was. As I mentioned earlier, initially they thought that it was a life or death kind of situation. Right. It turned out not to be. So it got really bad. It got to the point with the way it was being on my spinal column, it was affecting my ability to use my hands. And I got to the point where I could not work for a period earlier this year. And so here I am, and I had this great gig, Marvel Entertainment. I was so excited. I was branching out a new thing, working,
Yeah.
I got hired onto this gig at Marvel. I had to drop out of it because this pain and numbness that was a result of this got so bad. I dropped out of that project. I couldn't. I also lost my voice as a product of it. Wow. It got really bad, Todd.
That's pretty bad.
And I want to say again, everyone out there, students, I'm good. Future clients, I am back to 100%. This is done and gone. But in an interview like this, we're talking about real life, right?
For sure.
And how hard it can hit you. And so I'm using my imminent death to pitch my new book, which is just the perfect angle. I'm positioning my book perfectly here. I can't do anything. And I can't draw and paint for very long because the repetitive motion, just the numbness and pain was horrific. And so what I did was, I have my whole thing, my whole professional identity has been, and it's a total lie, but don't lie to other people, but go ahead and lie to yourself if it works. Go ahead and tell you, I'm great. It's a lie, I'm not. But tell yourself whatever you need to tell yourself to get the job done. And so every morning I would wake up, there's this song, it's really energy, really loud. It's about this gladiator. But gladiator, you can't stop me. I'm marching into the arena. I might die, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm in, baby. And it's loud, it's aggressive. And here I am all shriveled up. I listen to this song and I get all worked up. And then I hobble to my studio. And I look like death warmed over. Wow. But in my mind, I am the gladiator, and you cannot, there is nothing you cannot, I'm tripping over the stairs walking up to my studio. My stairs are stopping me. But in my mind, I'm going to lie and say, no, it's not. This is a triumph. This is the moment that I've been training for all of my life. There's still something I can do, and guess what that is? I can finish my book. I can't draw and paint, but in Photoshop and in the design program, I can shuffle the images around. I can do my page layouts. Right. I can do all my page. I have that much. And I mentioned I'd lost my voice. I tried whispering for voice capture, because how do you write a book when you cannot type? I couldn't type. But my computer headset couldn't do voice capture. I tried it on my phone. My phone could understand me whispering. And so I dictated that entire book whispering into my phone, and then I would email it to myself.
No kidding. Wow.
And we have editors, of course, fantastic people at Design Studio Press who have published my books. And so they touch it up for me. But that's how I wrote my book. Wow. And then so I put all that together, page layouts, and then I mentioned, so I have this mass that they found, and they think it's cancer. Yeah. And they think, and this kind of cancer is the kind they thought it was, vicious. And even if you take it, you take it out, it's going to come back. And that's what they thought it was. And so I am at the hospital with my wife in the hospital bed, getting ready to go into surgery. And I dictated the last chapter of my book into my phone. Wow. Emailed it to the publisher, and I was done. I finished the book. Gladiator. Actually,
man, that is hardcore.
Works. Just you do. That's kind of the thing. You frame things. I don't know. It's real life. You just frame things in a way that's useful to you, and then you do it.
Absolutely. In the end of the day, it's all the story we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah. And by the way, we're so proud of the book. Read it. I'm so convinced that people get a lot out of it. But skip that last chapter. That makes absolutely no sense that I'm in the hospital. But other than that, they cleaned it up for me. We're good. We're really proud of it.
Yeah, I can't wait. When's it? It's coming out in 2 weeks.
So yeah, we had it at Lightbox, which was an amazing expo that we did a couple of weeks ago, and Schoolism was involved in that, and I had a booth. So we sold out of the advanced copies, but it's pre-order on Amazon, pre-order on Design Studio Press. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, it might be actually ready to ship. So jump on Amazon, jump on Design Studio. I think it's designstudiopress.com. I do know this, but
I'll put all the relevant links in there for everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. It's out there.
Great. I cannot wait to see it.
I came out of the surgery. The doctor said, okay, to my wife, we successfully, the surgery was very successful, though you have to prepare yourself for the likelihood, because of where we were working, there's a likelihood that he will have paralysis. So here we go from, if this initial biopsy holds, he's gone. Right. And the time he has left, we're looking at a likelihood, based on how we had to do the surgery, that he's going to have paralysis. So when I came out of the surgery, and this is kind of embarrassing, because instead of talking to my wife and, hey babe, I woke up and I didn't know who was in the room. I woke up and I felt my hands. I jiggled my hands and they seemed normal. So I lifted my hand up in the air and I started, and you guys, we're in radio audio land here, and so they can't see what I'm doing, but I'm kind of swiveling my hand back and forth. I'm making drawing movements.
Right.
And my wife looked at me. She was in the room, and here I'm lifting, I'm kind of coming to and lifting my arm up and making these weird gestures. And she's thinking, oh no, he's gone. His mind is gone. He's lost it. No, it wasn't that kind of a surgery. But she's like, oh my gosh, he's lost it. What's going on? And she's like, hey babe, how are you feeling? Are you okay? As if to say, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm drawing. I'm going through the motions of drawing to make sure I can still do it.
Right.
And that was the first thing I did coming out of surgery. No paralysis,
Wow.
No long-term problems. People saw at Lightbox, and you see right now I'm wearing an eye patch.
Yeah.
And it's possible that I'll have to wear it for quite some time. Because of the spinal thing, it actually caused some double vision, surprisingly.
Yeah.
But it's correcting itself, and I'm wearing an eye patch for a little while. And it's kind of fun. Everyone at Lightbox thought I was they're like, is Nathan thinking this is a cosplay venue? What's with the pirate patch thing? No, I had to wear it. People were very generous. In their mind, they were thinking like, what's with the eye patch? But oh yeah, you look great. Wow, you look like Nick Fury or something. I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna want to believe the compliment. But so I came out of this horrific thing with you've got 30 plus years left to live, no lasting problems. I'm back working at 100. I'm better than 100% because I have this thing that every second is even more valuable than it was before, and so I'm working better than I was before. And this eye patch thing, I was joking with the surgeon. He's like, sorry about the eye patch. You'll probably have to wear it for a while. Your eyes will self-correct, but it's going to take quite a while. And I'm like, I squint my eye shut half the time at my computer screen when I'm drawing, when I'm painting. I literally squint one eye closed. So professionally, it has absolutely no effect. And so I guess we can kind of come out of this with life is so good. Yeah. And I can't. I'm coming at this with I can't believe the opportunities that I still have. I'm just thinking about when I came out of that surgery and I was able to get to the point where I'm walking upstairs, and I have no paralysis. And I'm drawing again. I'm painting again, and I'm back to 100%. This horrific thing was the best thing that could have happened to me.
Wow, incredible. Well, thank you for sharing that story. I know that was an intense time, no doubt.
It was it was a hell of a thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you're back to 100%, and can't wait to see what you do next. And
me neither. I don't know for sure what all of it's going to be, but there's time.
Yeah, and I mean, your work has definitely inspired me to keep a sketchbook in this chat. I need to get back into the daily practice. I was doing well for a minute with the schoolism stuff, but I need to get back into the daily. So,
well, we're always there for you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Nathan, for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it, and thanks for sharing all your work with us.
Thanks, Todd.